Part 5. The Wednesday Liturgy. Sirens learned a new chord that Wednesday. It started as a hum, one ambulance carving noon into lanes, and then the city layered in fire, police, the tin scream of an alarm pulling at air. People looked up from fried rice and spreadsheets and decided this was someone else's emergency until the sound climbed their ribs and sat down. Patchwork didn't wait for texts. The brick cube emptied. Nor grabbing her shadow case, Theo stuffing paper into his jacket like contraband, Mika jamming her hands into fingerless gloves because truth likes skin. Rowan walked out last, not because he was leader, but because he locked the door like the world would try to move in while they were gone. They heard it before they saw it. A tonal shift sirens don't make unless someone important has decided to be cruel. Downtown, a box truck had tried to wear a bus like a hat. Steel kissed glass. Glass answered with teeth. The intersection at Essex and Kingston looked like a giant had attempted origami and stopped halfway. Rena Kovacs was there before them. Of course she was. She was always at the part of the story where heat becomes a verb. Elias stepped from the sidewalk to the crosswalk without walking the space between, the tick in his chest aligning to triage. He felt for bodies like a pianist testing octaves. Here a shocky pulse, there a breath that had forgotten the steps. Slow, he told the crowd, a graze that turned panic into choreography. Freeze, he told a falling traffic light long enough for a kid to finish running under it. He moved without thinking and hated himself later for how much he enjoyed competence. The bus sagged. The truck's hood was a mouth trying to say sorry. Rena was under a beam that had been a roof 3 seconds earlier, helmet cracked, breath working through a pipe of pain. Another firefighter braced the metal with something that didn't look equal to this math. Don't, Rena said when she saw Elias, because she knew his face and she had the gall to love him enough to deny him. Blood had painted her cheek. Her eyes were steady in the way of people who know more about probabilities than prophets do. Shut up, Elias said, because prayer sometimes looks like rudeness. He put his hand on the beam and felt heat through glove. He froze the vibration, micro tremors pausing so the weight wouldn't shift while it considered new physics. Noor's shadow rope slid under like a jack. You could fold into a pocket. It held for a count of 4 and then asked for another line. Rowan barked orders no police officer could have given without being arrested for arrogance. Mika found the bus driver's hands and held them in hers. Truth, and asked what he had seen, pulling facts clean of panic. Theo stood with his arms out like a crossing guard, and a dozen men decided not to surge because paper cuts started in their imaginations. Elias bent to Rena. Up close her voice was a whisper stuck in tar. Don't, she said again, as if repetition could be a shield. You owe me eggs. I'll buy the chicken, he said. Consent. Her mouth twitched, half a smile, half a curse. Yes, she said, and that 2-letter word clicked the room into his palm. He slowed the bleed, slowed the bruising that wanted to flower fast. He slid reverse into the moment like a wire under a ring he couldn't remove, looking for purchase, avoiding bone. A second came easily, a second gave him nothing but hope. 2 more arrived like stingy waiters. The beam didn't lighten. Time doesn't help with weight. He tasted metal. His joints sang the wrong notes. Tax. Another line, Noor called, sweating in moonlight at noon. On it, Theo said, binding light to shadow with paper that wasn't paper anymore. The beam lifted half a breath, and the building decided it would not fall today. Other hands pulled Rena free enough to move air in a better angle. Alonzo arrived late because he had been moving someone else's pain like a stack of plates. He took one look at the situation and sat on the asphalt, back to the beam, eyes closed, dead arriving like a friend you don't deserve. You have 30 seconds, he said, voice even. After that I throw up. Elias pressed reverse again, deeper this time, hunting for before the crack in Rena's ribs, before the tear at the edge of her liver, before the breath went bargaining. He found a sliver and pulled. The sliver came and took a piece of him with it, a white-hot line from wrist to elbow, a pop in his right knee, like a cork in the wrong party. Rena's breath eased, cost doubled. The universe likes exact change, and Elias was paying with coins he did not count. He took one more second because he was this person, because consent was a ladder, and he thought he could stand on a rung with one foot and be fine. The beam shifted with the insulted groan of old metal. A firefighter shouted a word they reserve for when religion is present. "Freeze," Elias told the weight, and it held. A miracle for 2 beats. 1, none. They pulled Rena out. They had her. The world inhaled to see if it would keep her. Then the truck's battery decided to be a fireworks display, and the engine made a case for newer math, and a shockwave walked across the street. Elias couldn't stop everything. He stopped what his halo could hold. Rena's body stiffened, eyes on fire, then softened as if someone had smoothed the blanket on a bed. "Don't," she whispered. Third-time tradition, and in that syllable was withdrawal of consent you can hear even if you're a man who doesn't want to. "Promise?" He heard it. He hated it. He obeyed. Alonzo coughed once and leaned forward, hands shaking. He had caught more than any one person should, and was keeping it on layaway because the body can do magic if motive is good. Elias let reverse go. Rena's hand found his wrist. She squeezed. It was a ridiculous gesture to put in an epic, small, human, irrefutable. "Eggs," she said again, and died in a way that was not cinematic, which is to say, merciful. For a heartbeat that lasted a month, the city's sirens learned quiet. Then they found their chord again. Work resumed. Someone shouted for a medic, and a woman who had climbed out of the bus on her own sat down and cried about a dog she'd never had. Elias stood up into a body that had accepted interest. His knee told him about weather in advance now. His right hand had adopted a tremor he could slow but not hide. His chest bell rang once and then settled. He looked around for the lever that could change this story and saw none. The day should have ended there. It didn't, because Marcus Veyne had written a postscript and posted it where grief could not miss it. He arrived like a well-timed guest, walking down the street with his hands in his pockets, coat unrumpled, gaze lightly concerned. No one saw him as anything but a man unless they already knew to parse history out of posture. He stopped 3 feet from the beam and tipped his head, a gentleman paying respects at a funeral. "She was good," he said to Elias, as if neither of them had more credentials than that. "Leave," Nor said, voice like a wire. "I came to offer a lesson," Marcus said without turning his head. "You can't save everyone. If you try, you will turn yourself into a priest of a religion that eats its saints." "Get out," Theo said. Marcus's eyes did not leave Elias's. "She asked you not to bargain," he said softly. "You listened. Good. Now listen to yourself." Elias went toward him because he didn't trust his mouth not to make a contract his heart would regret. He froze the air between them to make a corridor of stillness, then stepped into it, which is rude and also correct. "What do you want?" he asked. "To see if you'll break," Marcus said, honest in that inhuman way. "Not today." "Why today?" Elias asked, and it was not accusation. It was inventory. Marcus considered lying and decided not to plant a weed he'd have to pull later. "Because grief is a smith," he said. "I wanted to see what kind of blade you become." "You want me to make mistakes," Elias said. "I want you interesting," Marcus said. "You're welcome." Nor's shadow rope looped Marcus's ankle. He stepped out of it as if complimented. "Another day," he said and left, not looking back, because etiquette requires you don't when you're the villain and the scene belongs to the dead. They worked. Work is the only liturgy that matters in a city that has decided not to believe in prophecies. Hours later, after the glass was broomed into bins and the intersection began to remember its old grammar, Patchwork went to the river and put their backs against stone. No speeches, no candles. Mika took a whoopee cushion out of her bag and set it on the steps beside her and didn't sit on it. It was the funniest thing she could think to not do. Rowan finally spoke. "We add a rule," he said. He didn't write it on a board. He set it into their chests. "We don't bargain with endings the person has accepted." "That's not a rule," Elias said, voice flat, hands empty. "It is for us," Rowan said. "Because if we try to break it, we become Marcus's clergy." Nor put her shoulder against Elias's and left it there until a minute passed without either of them needing a word. Alonzo slept sitting up. Det had not finished with him and would wake him later politely to return what he had held. In the days that followed, the city did the city. It posted video, wrote think pieces, decided heroes were useful as long as they stayed in their lane, and forgot the names of the dead except in houses where those names were the only ones that mattered. Elias tried to go back to rules and found he needed new ones. He wrote them on paper and burned the paper and still knew them. Consent is a door, not a lever. Containment is for moments, not monsters. Cost must be chosen, not leaked. Grief is not currency. Marcus is not math. He visited Yara and Samir at the hospital and bought tea with too much sugar, and when the surgeon came out with a story that was honest and good, Elias allowed himself to put 1 minute of age back on his own bones and kept it there. He went to Rena's funeral and didn't stand with the line of uniforms. He stood in the back by a radiator that hissed like an old friend and watched photographs slide past. A girl in a Red Sox cap. A woman grinning with a wrench. A person who had not asked to become a lesson. After, in the parking lot, a man who had been Rena's captain put a hand on Elias's shoulder. "She told me you were stupid," he said. "I like that about you." "Me too," Elias said. He meant it. They laughed because that's a way to clean a knife. Patchwork met in the brick cube and planned without romantic adjectives. Abena came back long enough to lay a map on the table that smelled like a library. "He wasn't born to it," she said, tapping a circle around a year and a town name. "He bargained into it." 1871. A clinic that was a cult with invoices. A woman with a gift she called keeping. She died. He didn't. "What if we go there?" Mika said. "Place matters." "Place matters," Nor said, as if she'd been waiting for someone else to say it. "Placement is truth." Rowan nodded. "He endures because a promise was stapled to him, and we keep cutting the paper and not the staple. We need the staple." Elias listened and did not try to be a leader because grief had taught him something humility hadn't. He was not the point. The work was. He would build the lever. They would build the fulcrum. Together, perhaps, they could pry a man out of a century and ask him politely to start over. He went home and sat at the edge of his bed and didn't hold his age. He let the night add lines to him. He wanted to deserve what Rena had called him. He wanted to spend better. At 3:11 a.m., the building sighed the way old buildings do, and for once he did not interpret it as omen. He dreamed no oranges, no babies, no clever plans. He dreamed a kitchen table, 2 plates, eggs. When he woke, he bought eggs and took them to a firehouse and cooked for people who know more about flame than anyone has a right to, and called it training. He didn't know yet that the little town on Abena's map would welcome them with a parade they hadn't asked for, that a woman who had written a book no one read was going to give them the staple, and that Marcus Veyne would arrive with candy for children and leave with 1 fewer minute than he intended. He only knew this. Wednesday had given him a liturgy he would not forget. He would not bargain with endings. He would bargain with beginnings. He would learn to make reverse funny enough to be cruel. And when the time came to turn a myth into a toddler, he would do it with a laugh he'd earned. Part 6. The Town That Kept a Promise. Maps are liars that tell useful lies. Abena's smelled like linen and ink and a librarian's perfume. The circle she'd drawn around a mill town on a snaking river claimed Morrow's Ford, Est, 1838. The internet said it was a postcard people drove through without stopping, a place that had decided nostalgia was a business plan. The old county register said something else. Charitable Clinic of St. Bridget, operating 1869 to 1872. A ledger that was mostly names. A margin note that was not a note so much as a warning. Keeper resides. No one signed it. They went in 2 cars because plans break better when you have spare tires. Rowan drove the first with Abena riding shotgun, pretending not to navigate. Nor sat behind them knitting air around her wrists like warm-up stretches. Elias took the second car with Mika and Theo, who treated the back seat like an archive that could withstand snacks. Alonzo declined, someone had to cover the city, and texted, "You owe me pie." Not metaphorical. Morrow's Ford did the usual small-town entrance thing. A wooden sign with hand-carved flourish, a diner with a bell on the door, a church steeple that had learned every weather and decided to forgive it. The river wore a footbridge with more pride than the mill ever had. The old clinic's address was now an antique store that sold histories by the yard. Mason jars, hymnals, chairs with other people's Sunday carved into the armrests. Inside, a woman with a hairband and a face that declared she could carry a table by herself, looked up from a book and smiled like they were either customers or trouble, and she liked both. Her name tag said, "Kate." "Help you?" she asked. "We're looking for the past," Rowan said. "Everyone is," Kate said. "I have quilts and an icebox that thinks it's a time machine." "We're researching the clinic that used to be here," Abena said gently. "St. Bridget's." Kate's eyes did that small flicker that means I know the thing you're asking about, and am deciding if I want to say I do. "People like to put saints on buildings when they were doing charity," she said. "Makes the donors feel taller." She closed her book and slid it under the counter without hiding the title. The Keeping, Faith and Fraud in Morrow's Ford, 1869-72. Author, C. E. Klein. "Good book?" Mika asked, all innocence. "It's mine," Kate said, "so no." "You wrote the marginalia in the county ledger," Rowan said, because of course he already knew. He had that way of knowing when a room belonged to someone. "Keeper resides." Kate let out a breath through her nose that was half laugh, half admission. "I wrote the resides," she said. "The ledger had the keeper long before I did." "The who?" Theo asked. "The keeper," Kate said, capital letter audible. Town myth. Saint of stitches. Stories say she could keep things from breaking. Or keep people, depends on the version. The clinic was hers, or she was the clinic's. We don't have photographs that agree on who did the real work. We have a lot of names of men who posed near it. "She kept," Abena said softly, as if greeting an old adversary. "And one day, the thing she kept refused to be returned." Kate's gaze moved to Abena like a magnet recognizing its opposite. "You know him." "I know the kind of story he is," Abena said. "We're here for the staple." Kate smiled at the word like a teacher who hadn't expected a student to use it. "You've read my book." "We haven't," Mika admitted. "But we'd like to." "You can buy it," Kate said, businesswoman. "Then, or you can take me to lunch and I'll read you the important parts, because writers get lonely in towns that don't want to discuss their own bones." They fed her soup and questions at a diner that believed in pie and brand new coffee burned to the perfect old taste. Kate read from memory like some pages had been tattooed on her mouth. The clinic took in the consumptives and the child fevers and the women who needed hands more than sermons. The keeper, if she existed, didn't cure. She kept. Stalled the bad hour. Made room for a better one. Widowers married the clinic in thanks and then forgot it. Men with money wrote checks and then wrote letters about their own charity, so the clinic could not scream. What did she ask in return? Nor asked. Promises, Kate said. The kind that outlived the promise maker. There's a story about a mill owner who asked her to keep his son through a fever, and she did, and then asked him to keep the river clean. He pledged. He defaulted. The clinic flooded. She died. How? Elias asked. No one writes the how for women, Kate said. She died and the town learned to tell the story in a way that made her a saint instead of a warning. We build better statues than systems. Marcus? Rowan asked. Kate nodded. A traveler with a throat like a hymn. He came with money and need. The need outlived the money. He made a deal in a room with 4 witnesses who later disagreed about whether it had happened. One said there was a little bell. One said there was a prayer. One said there was a ledger entry where there should have been a name. One said she watched the shadows hold still like a field of corn in no wind. Where? Abena said. What room? Kate folded her napkin with priestly care. Downstairs. The antique store used it for storage so long they forgot it was a room. The clinic had a basement they called the cloister, because someone thought it sounded holy to say cellar pretty. The deal was made there. Can we see it? Mika asked, already halfway to standing. Kate looked at Rowan, at Abina, at Elias, with that particular librarian's calculus. Risk, reward, who will put the book back where they found it? We can, she said, but I'm not going down there without a laugh. Why? Elias asked. Because sometimes the only way to walk into a myth is to bring a joke, Kate said, standing. It makes the room remember it's not in charge. They went back through the antiques, through a door that had known more hands than hinges deserve, downstairs that had made peace with being uneven. The basement smelled like old wood and aspirational vinegar. Kate found a switch that produced a single bulb's worth of permission. The room was small enough that Nora's shoulders brushed shadow even before she invited it. Stone walls, a shelf with bottles that had once held tonics and now held dust. A table that had been an altar because men insist on these repurposings. In the corner, iron hammered into the shape of a little bell frame without a bell. 4 witnesses, Kate said. 1 bell. No bell. The keeper, Abina said. The promise, the staple. How do we unstaple? Mika asked. Kate looked at Elias. You're the time boy, she said, not unkind. You tell me. Elias stepped to the table and felt his halo pressed to the room like a palm to a window. He could feel echoes like fingerprints on lacquer. Consent spoken out loud. Cost not counted, then counted wrong. A man's hunger. A woman's steadiness. A town just glad someone else would hold the night. He pressed slow into the stone, and the air got thicker in a way that wasn't physical, so much as memory adjusting its hem. He pressed freeze into the metal of the bell frame until it stopped pretending it had never been rung. He whispered because he didn't have a better trick. Is there a bell? And the air said yes, in that way rooms sometimes do, by creaking where they hadn't yet today. Consent, he said, and put his palms on the table. Keeper, if you kept this man, if you stapled him to endurance, will you speak to a rude child of your craft? Nor didn't mock him for the address. Abina bowed her head like a student bowing to a photograph of a teacher. Rowan watched the ceiling as if checking for cops and gods both. The light stuttered once. Kate laughed on purpose. One bright, indecent bark. The room eased like a cat deciding not to bite. Elias pressed reverse into the table, not as time but as placement, winding the room's arrangement back 3 inches through a century. The dust on the shelf remembered its last caretaker and tried to look tidy. The bell frame remembered a bell and held space as if weight swung there. And then a thing happened he would later call, for lack of an agreed vocabulary, a polite haunting. The air thickened around a shape at the head of the table. Not a person. The intention of a person, the way an empty coat smells like them. A voice without sound arranged itself between their ribs until 5 bodies were convinced it had spoken. Do not make a priest of me. Elias swallowed. I won't, he said, though priests seemed to be a theme. He asked for keeping, the room said. I kept. He did not ask how long. He paid poorly. I collected. The staple, Abina said. Where? Here. The bell frame hummed. It wasn't metaphysics. It was a room remembering where it had put its tools. He bound himself to a line. He cannot unspool. A line, Elias repeated. Not a circle, not a chain. A line is kinder, the room said, and Elias felt the wince in it. I meant mercy. He loved the room immediately for knowing that kindness and harm can share a hand. How do we undo a line? Nor asked gently. You take the other end, the room said, as if explaining scissors to a child. Where is it? Rowan asked. On him. In him. The shape paused, searching for a word that didn't exist. Behind him. It was trying to say origin and finding only directions. You're saying the other end of the line is anchored to his beginning. Not the myth, the before, Elias said. Yes. Elias looked at Kate. Is there anything left of the bell? Kate walked to a shelf and took down a tin labeled buttons, because antique stores lie too. She opened it and poured out not buttons but iron filings that glittered like a threat. She grinned at their faces. A kid brought these in years ago, she said. Said his granddad took a file to a bell because it had kept his brother too long, and he wanted to keep something for himself. Folklore isn't tidy. Filings are still the bell, Noor said. Placement, Abina murmured. Staple filings to line. Line to origin. Elias cupped the iron dust in his palm and felt the halo warm like a stove kept low. He pressed reverse into the filings, not to make them bell again, but to remember their arrangement. They lifted as a whisper does, a cloud that wasn't air, and formed an outline of a small bell the way a constellation makes sense only if you allow it. The rune cleared its throat. A chime rang that existed in their bones first and then outside them. Consent, Elias said in his head, because he had learned that trick could be prayer and tool both. Keeper, if I ask to unmake a line you made in mercy, will you let me? The hum set like amber. If you replace it with a gentler thread, mercy has conditions. Of course it does. What thread? Mika asked, squeezing the whoopee cushion she had insisted on bringing because comedy is warding. It squeaked, reverent and awful. Kate laughed again and the room allowed it. Care, the room said, and Elias saw Rena's hand on his wrist, Yara's mouth under her palm. Alonzo sleeping upright with debt like a blanket. He will be kept. Keep him differently. We can't keep him like you did, Elias said, honest. We don't want to. He shouldn't endure. Then keep him to a beginning. Elias thought of Abina's map of 1871, of a man with the appetite to outlive a river. He nodded. We can do that. They stayed in the cloister until the light upstairs changed, until the iron outline sighed back into filings, until Kate put the tin away with due respect, and a muttered stay that wasn't an order so much as a hope. Back on the street, the town did the parade thing. Well-meaning people with folding chairs and lemonade walking past the car and waving because newcomers mean either real estate or gossip. A man with a paper cone of candy handed one to Mika and said, "Free for the curious," and Mika took it because she was both curious and 12 for life. The man was Marcus Veyne. Elias felt him before he saw him, the way you feel thunder before weather. He turned, the tick in his chest keeping time with annoyance. Marcus wore local like a rented suit. He had bought a shirt in town and let it wrinkle because appearances are arithmetic to him. He smiled at Kate with a nod that said, "I support small business," and made Kate feel like polishing a fork. Tourists? Marcus asked, breezy. Pilgrims, Noor said. My favorite kind, Marcus said. He looked at the antiques window where a reflection of himself shook hands with a reflection of Elias. He smiled like light through leaves. I hear you met the keeper. Elias didn't ask how he knew. Men like Marcus have networks that aren't phones. She says you paid poorly, Elias said. I paid what was asked, Marcus said. Everyone regrets the price later. We won't, Elias said. You will, Marcus said kindly. You'll call it something noble to make it tolerable. He offered Mika another candy. She didn't take it. He looked genuinely amused. Learning, he said. Elias stepped closer because sometimes etiquette is proximity. He pressed slow against Marcus's back, that behind the keeper had named. The resistance was there, like pushing at a door that had been painted shut 100 years ago. He pressed freeze into the iron filings in the tin in Kate's pocket, bell, and felt a string thrummed between the two lines. He didn't pull. He held. Marcus's eyes narrowed a fraction. Careful, he said, and meant it as a compliment and a warning in both. Consent? Elias said softly. Give me a second. Marcus cocked his head. You really are a priest, he said. Very well. 1. Elias took one, paid with a stitch of white in his hair at the temple, and didn't gloat. He threaded that second into the iron dust and felt the room in the cloister nod like a neighbor at a fence. Staple met thread. Funny, Marcus said. He touched Elias's shoulder as if greeting a friend at a wedding. If you ever decide you'd rather be interesting than good, call me. You'll be late to your own immortality, Elias said. We'll make sure of it. Marcus laughed, delighted again, and strolled down Main Street, buying a paper he would not read, tipping a busker's hat with a coin that had paid for someone else's bridge. They regrouped in Kate's back room, not pretending to be calm. Noor leaned on a shelf and let shadow coil, then settle. Abena stood with her palms on the table and said, "You have a hand on the line." "For a second," Elias said. "Seconds are all we need," Rowan said. "We stack them." Kate watched them like a historian arriving at a chapter she had only dared to outline. "How many will it take?" she asked. "Enough," Nor said. "Enough for what?" Theo asked. "For him to miss the moment he became unending," Abena said. "We don't finish him. We preempt him. We convince the universe to treat his beginning as an appointment he fails to keep." "And if we miss?" Mika asked, again 12 and not. "Then we do it again," Rowan said. "And again. We have patience that doesn't require immortality." They drove home with the tin of filing seat belted like a child, which none of them commented on because symbols are either tools or decorations, and today they were tools. At a rest stop where a woman was teaching her toddler to throw bread to geese in a way that would end poorly for someone's shoes, Elias stood in the shade and allowed himself 10 minutes of age. He felt them settle on his back like the opposite of wings. He didn't iron them away. He wanted them. He wanted Rena to approve of his ledger. That night they sketched a plan on the whiteboard and then wiped it because cops and gods can read. The plan wasn't complex. Complex plans are how you lose to men who have practiced complexity for centuries. The plan had 3 sentences. Bring Bell to him. Ask for seconds. Thread them backward until the origin door is the wrong size. Mika drew a toddler on the corner of the board wearing a crown and labeled it Plan B. No one erased it. Elias slept 5 hours and dreamed nothing, which is sometimes the only mercy the body can provide. He woke to a text from a number he knew without having saved. "You think beginnings are safe. They aren't. M.B." He replied, "You think jokes aren't weapons. They are, for example." Marcus didn't text back. He sent a photograph, a baby he had held once, decades ago, that had not been him, which is to say he was practicing reminding the universe of a category. Elias looked at the photograph for the time it takes to decide what kind of man you are and put it face down. They were going to try the stupid, funny surgical thing. They were going to tug on a line anchored to mercy with consent as the key and a bell made of filings as the ring, and a handful of seconds like stitches. They were going to thread a myth back to, before it became impolite to interrupt him. They were going to make a man late to his own immortality, which is the nicest way to end a monster. And if it didn't work the first time, they were going to keep laughing until it did.